Today's topic is something I heard at least 3 times this week, so I knew I really wanted to talk about it because it was interesting to me how one thing was the root cause of so many people's overwhelm in business. And we think that overwhelm is usually the result of doing too much, right? And of course, that's part of it. But sometimes we get overwhelmed even though on paper we're not that busy, which shows you that overwhelm at its root, it's our understanding of what's happening that's causing overwhelm. And there are other things that can cause overwhelm and confusion that are not necessarily just having too much on your plate. And this root cause of overwhelm in all these cases is undefined boundaries. And I want to talk about the importance of having strong boundaries when you're building a personal brand, a business. This is especially true if you're a service provider. You're doing heavy human contact, basically. Our lack of boundaries, we think it means weakness. But in most cases, people who don't have boundaries are not people who are weak and don't know how to assert themselves necessarily. But the root cause for most people is lack of awareness of our own boundaries in the first place. We don't really listen to ourselves very well to figure out how we feel in a certain situation. We feel uncomfortable with something, but we do an override and we kind of almost tell ourselves to just suck it up in the moment without really listening to why we feel the way we do about the thing. So I'll give you guys some examples. And these are all things that I saw just last week. Example number one, I had to take notes, was somebody who was overgiving, really going above and beyond in everything that he was doing for people. But the problem is he was doing it and hoping at some level that there's going to be something in exchange for that. And when that was not reciprocated, he felt betrayed. So when he went above and beyond to promote somebody else, a peer or someone he had a joint kind of collaboration with, and the other person didn't do as much, he felt resentment. He felt like people just kind of took him for granted. And it's not even what was happening, but that was his perception. That's how he felt because he was overgiving with an expectation and then being unable to say, well, I'm doing this with the expectation of X, kind of hoping that people will just magically get it and then be disappointed because people aren't living up to a certain expectation that he has. The second one was someone who said to me, how do I differentiate or know that somebody is talking to me because they're interested in being my client versus being my friend? That if they were to be friendly with people, they would kind of blur the lines, and therefore if that person asked for a favor, they would feel obligated to give their service away for free and feel awkward about transitioning from being your friend to being like, okay, this is the line here, you have to pay me for this question or this service or that sort of thing, fearing that people will take advantage of them, basically. Another one I heard was this person loved doing one-on-one sessions, but she was afraid that it was going to take control away from her, that she was not going to have any power over her calendar, her time. She was going to be overwhelmed. She's going to be overworked. She's going to be talking to people she didn't want to talk to, and to me also, by the way, like things happened this week that tested my boundaries again. So for example, there was an offer that I saw. I knew that I could make some money there, and I looked at it and I knew obviously that there's no excitement, there's no fuck yes, so it's like not really, no. And still part of me was like, yeah, but maybe if you just consider it, and I just kind of had to be like, no, I've learned from experience to know what works for me and what doesn't. And something doesn't have to be bad or terrible or could even be great on paper, but if I know for personal reasons that this is not right, it's just not aligned, there's nothing wrong with it, it's just not aligned, I'm not going to do it. There are also many cases, and now it seems like every other week, no joke, there's somebody approaching me to kind of co-found a business with them, and it just happens so much nowadays that I'm like, they're all amazing human beings. They're all great opportunities, but it's a boundary. I know where I'm going with my own business and my path. And I know I have to say no to a lot of things that are good. And this actually came up in one of the calls where somebody told me that they were working on so many things. They were in so many projects. He was like collaborating with a friend here and supporting this other guy who had a startup. And he was and he's like trying to be there for all of his friends and peers who are also, entrepreneurs, creators. And then on most days, not actually having the time to work on the one thing that is most important to him, the thing that he knows is like literally the dream, the thing he wants to work on. So I've seen it again and again and again. So again, it's not that these are weak people. When we think of, oh, this person has no boundaries, we automatically assume that the person is kind of a doormat, that people are just like walking all over them, but that's not necessarily the case. So a lot of times people are powerful and able to assert themselves, but they just don't know that something is a boundary because they're so used to ignoring how they feel in the moment. So I think one of the hardest things for us is to not even to assert our boundaries as much as it is to understand what our boundaries are and to own them. Because the minute we realize this is a potential boundary, when this person talks to me in a certain type of way, even though it's not disrespectful, there's something within me that feels like this is a cross, like I don't feel too good about this. It's hard to own that. It's hard to say this feeling alone is good enough for me to say no to this opportunity or to say no to this thing that seemingly I, shouldn't be so uptight about. Like, this person says, let's jump on a quick call. It's only 5 minutes. I'm sure you have time for a 5-minute call. And it's true, you have time for a 5-minute call, but you don't want to. And part of you might feel in that moment that you're being too much or that you're being too uptight. And I know I talk about unclenching buttholes, but that's not what I mean by that, right? Sometimes if you feel that something is important enough to you, like you don't have to justify yourself is what I am saying, but you have to get clear and honest with yourself. If you know that you're only comfortable giving this much without getting anything in return, then only give this much, because you really have no way of knowing if the other person is going to reciprocate. And no, it doesn't make them selfish. It doesn't make them the bad guy. They're not obligated to do anything in return. It doesn't make them bad people. And yes, everything should balance itself out. If you think that you've given and you've given and you've given, you haven't gotten what you quote unquote should receive, you will receive that. It's not necessarily going to come from that specific source. So I would make peace with that. It would make your life a lot easier. And like in the example of the person who was afraid of making friends with people because she was concerned that they might not think of her as a client, I would ask myself the same question. Hey, what am I comfortable giving away for free? How much free consultation, if any at all, am I willing to give to people? How much quote unquote coaching am I willing to give if you are a coach? How much free advice on what I'm an expert on am I willing to give away, if any at all? You are not obligated to do that. How much am I willing to give away before I say, no, this is like, we have to have a conversation and make this official. And you're also permitted to start a relationship with that person and draw very clear lines from the beginning and say, hey, this is the one thing I'm not willing to talk about. Outside, like, you want to talk about these topics, we're going to have to create lines and boundaries around that. But what you don't want to do is walk into relationships not being clear on what you're willing or not willing to give, or what you're expecting, and not being able to communicate that comfortably and hold that. This is why I said it's really important to own it. If your boundaries are questionable or they're fluid, people think that they are preferences, but they're not really boundaries. They're like, it's a nice to have, but it's not so important. Often it's easy to think that the other person is a bad guy or the other person doesn't respect our boundaries. Sometimes it's the case that people don't respect their boundaries, such as the person who says something like, let's just jump on a 5-minute call. It's not a big deal, right? Surely you have 5 minutes and therefore you should be talking to me. One could say that that is a disrespectful thing, but it could also be that that person has never been taught that they can't have everything that they want in life, and they just bumped into you and they realized they can't have everything they want all the time, and they're going to think certain thoughts about you and think you're the bad guy, and they may or may not, you don't know, right? And that's okay. And that's key, really, in having these boundaries, is in being okay with being misunderstood, being okay with being judged, being okay with people feeling bad. We're not trying, okay? We're not trying to hurt other people. We're not trying to disappoint them. but it is inevitable that you're going to disappoint some people. It's not even you, like you're not disappointing people, but it is inevitable that you're going to say something that, someone is expecting you to have a certain type of response and you give them a completely different response and they don't feel too good. It is what it is. And so we have to get comfortable with that. The situation I mentioned where this person who was afraid of having one-on-one calls, who said that she was afraid that her calendar was going to get overfilled. My advice to her was to define those boundaries, define the boundaries of, first of all, what am I comfortable with realistically, as much time talking to people, if all the conditions are right, if I'm talking to people that I genuinely enjoy talking to, I'm picking the ideal clients or customers, ideal work conditions, I'm doing work that lights me up, I'm doing it in the right environment, I'm taking enough breaks, I have a day designed perfectly the way I want it to be. From this place, what do I think my energy can handle as far as calls? There's no right and wrong answer. Some people will tell you, even if I'm talking to the best clients on the planet, I do not want to. I really would rather not have any calls at all. And somebody else might say, well, then in that case, I can handle maybe 4 calls a day, 5 calls a day. Some people might be able to handle more than that. Everybody's different, and even the one person will be different in different seasons and times, depending on what else is happening in their life and how they're feeling overall. So there's no right and wrong answer. But if you are clear with yourself, again, it goes back to clarity about what do I want, what feels good to me, and reconnecting with our feelings and owning that thing, just the fact that we want and desire that is more than enough of a reason to work towards that. Basically, that's the bottom line of having strong boundaries. It's connected to our sense of self-worth and feeling that we are worthy of pleasing. But it's like, who do you think you are to expect that in life? Like, that's normal. That's just part of life. And to go, well, maybe that's the way it's been, and maybe that's the way it's expected to be this way. But I actually want things to be different. And you know what? I'm going to try to make things better. And that's kind of scary sometimes because it makes us think maybe we're asking for too much, maybe we're being too much, that sort of thing. And for me in the past, the way this manifested, I wasn't even honest with myself about the fact that I didn't have strong boundaries sometimes, because I viewed myself as a very strong person. And I was strong and I was assertive. I did not have a problem telling people off. But that's the issue, is that because I didn't have clarity about my boundaries, anytime somebody overstepped, or I had the perception that they overstepped the boundary, which I wasn't even aware of, right? But I felt bad, but it almost felt like it was sudden. But to me, it was like over time, I was saying no, but not loudly enough, right? I wasn't very clear on the no. It was like a fluid no, not being very clear on those boundaries, and kind of trying to communicate and discuss and like figure out where am I standing in relation to this person. And then suddenly this person does something that's, or maybe there's an accumulation of all of that. And I, quote unquote, suddenly make a strong stance and say, no, okay, we are not like doing this anymore. There's no way we're going to be able to work together. And sometimes for some people, it may seem sudden. To me, it's like, it was confusing. It was like, I've been saying this for months. I complained to you that, I'm doing more in this business partnership for so long. And they'd be like, yeah, you did, but you also went ahead and fixed those problems anyway and took care of it anyway. So it's like, I will complain about it, but I'll do it anyway. And it's like, oh, well, you're fine, right? And I resented that. I was like, how could you not understand that the fact that I'm annoyed and upset means that I don't want to do it? But I learned a lesson. Hey, it turns out you're supposed to also say, you know what? And I'm also not doing it. I don't fucking want to do it. I'm not doing it, period. Because some people, that's what it takes for them to get it. I was seeing it from my own perspective, because to me, if I notice that somebody is not feeling well in a certain situation, I immediately try and see what can I do to make them more comfortable. But there are some people who are like, well, if you don't mind getting fucked over, great. And that's that. And it's on me to protect my boundaries. And so the point is, I didn't see myself as somebody who didn't have strong boundaries because of those very strong kind of reactions to people and not being afraid of telling people off. But the reality is, the reason why I was so reactive at times, or I would snap at someone, was in fact because of that, you know. And now I never get angry. Well, I wouldn't say I never get angry, but it's very rare that I would get aggravated or triggered. People would send me messages. They're not being disrespectful, but there's that quiet underneath it. There's something that's like, dude, what are you thinking? Past me would have been so aggravated and would have told that guy off and would have been like, you don't understand. I have a bigger dick. But I don't care and I don't feel angry or anything. And I know that it says nothing about me. It's all about the other person. And that's because now I'm clearer on my boundaries and I own them. I'm comfortable with them. I don't feel like I'm being too much. My comfort is incredibly important. My well-being, my happiness, all of these things are incredibly important. And I just don't justify because it's my life. So that's what it means to build your boundaries. So anyway, so I was reflecting on it and I thought it was something important to talk about because it happens to all of us. And if life throws situations, scenarios at you right now where you feel like somebody is not respecting your boundaries, I understand if it makes you angry. It used to make me angry before. It used to make me feel like, oh, this person is not respecting me. But most of the time, that's really not the intention. You determine for yourself what you're happy to give. You determine for yourself what those boundaries are. You determine for yourself and ask for what you want and need from other people. Ask, make it very clear. This is what I expect without attachment. This is what I expect. Take it or leave it. Okay. So the point is that it doesn't seem like it's a boundaries issue when it's happening. It may seem like I'm tired, I'm overwhelmed, I am confused, I've got too much. Oh, people drain me. I'm an introvert. And you think about all these possibilities and these things may or may not be true, but the reality is all of them are symptoms of weak boundaries, because when you have weak boundaries, you overgive, you overextend, then you don't have time for the things that matter to you. Then you don't create time for yourself to rest. Then you don't create time to pursue your own goals. Then you don't take time to enjoy your life, to figure out what is it that brings you more energy. And you're also more overwhelmed and more drained by the fact that your mind is also running in the background, thinking and overthinking about these stories, resenting them, questioning things, and if you're like me in the past, running these arguments in my head, fighting with people in my head as I'm fighting with myself, it was just like this constant fight, this constant argument, years of argument in my mind, of anger, of an angry conversation with my own existence. I would love to hear your thoughts, whatever you're watching this. If you're not seeing it on Brands That Are Alive, go to brandsthatealive.com/mojo. I send a video like this every week, but whatever you're seeing it, drop some comments. Let me know, what's it been like for you setting boundaries and resetting boundaries and retesting your boundaries and your experience with these things, with overwhelm when you overgive and things don't work out exactly the way you expect them to. All right. I hope that this was enjoyable, and I'll see you guys next week.